Why should people care? Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I live in this world. So from my perspective, this is one of the biggest problems in the world because, the data suggests that 1 out of every 4 people, 25% of people worldwide deal with chronic pain. It's more people than heart disease, cancer, and diabetes combined. So it's kind of staggering. And the amount of money we spend on managing pain also overwhelms those other diagnoses, which is kind of shocking. The number is somewhat higher in kids, which is a problem. The number is, of course, higher in, populations that are discriminated against, for instance, right? Or that don't have the same opportunities in society, or that live in places where there are a lot of traumatic events happening, or, those populations, the percentage is even higher. And when I talk about chronic symptoms, I'm not just talking about pain. It could be anything from digestive stuff to autoimmune illness, right? It could be disease is like a whole category, but probably for the purpose of today, it's best to talk about pain because we're talking about athletes and it's a common topic amongst athletes. I don't have the data. I wish I did on the number of athletes that deal with chronic symptoms, but I would say you'd be hard pressed to find any athlete that doesn't have something going on in their body that's top of mind, right? That's holding them back in some way. Okay, so I'm Charlie Merrill. I'm a physical therapist in Boulder, Colorado. I've had a clinical practice working with some of the best athletes in the world, but also sort of everybody. I don't really discriminate against certain types of people in terms of my patient population. I've been practicing 23 years. I just happen to be in Boulder, so we have a lot of athletes here, right? I'm an athlete myself. I've been playing and moving and consuming exercise for as long as I can remember. We can go into that as much as you want, but I would say there isn't a sport probably that I haven't tried or experimented with at least at some point, if not competed at a relatively high level. So I love to be in my body, and I love to explore movement. And as I've gotten older, I'll be 50 this year. The way I think about that and relate to that has also changed a lot. Maybe that'll be interesting to talk about. You can sort of decide where you want this to go. Aside from being a clinician, I'm a consultant sort of in the health technology space. So I consult with a company called Lynn Health, and they're building this digital health platform to make access to chronic pain management, chronic symptom management more accessible and affordable. It's a very exciting project. I teach clinicians, especially body-oriented clinicians and people that are more like gym-based and more like athlete-focused, where there's a real strong body of knowledge about like how we treat the body itself from a performance perspective, but clinicians that sort of want to build out this more psychologically grounded, trauma-informed part of their practice. I work with Dr. Howard Schubiner, who's an amazing clinician, researcher, teacher. We co-teach this course called Beyond Pain Education for clinicians. And then I'm developing right now a program for people, for athletes that are dealing with pain, so that I can share some of that more directly with them. They don't have to rely on a clinician to be able to access these ideas that we're going to talk about today. I don't know. There's a lot more to share. I love to create content. I love to talk with people and synthesize information and get nerdy about things. So
I asked in the survey before, why should our listeners care about this topic? You said pain is a universal human experience that, if athletes don't understand it, has a big potential negative impact on performance. So what don't athletes understand about pain? What do you wish they knew?
Yeah, I think what you just said is important. Just to reiterate that, like the impact of pain on society as a whole is really big. I don't think we understand how much it affects people's lives and their relationships and their I like to call it health span, right? Different from lifespan, like how much they're thriving in their life. It's a real barrier, and of course we know that pain is a part of sport. Like you can't be an athlete and not have pain. It's not optional. So I want people and I want athletes to understand that pain is not what we used to think it was. We used to think that pain always meant that something was injured or damaged, that pain was a direct correlation that something was wrong with the body. And now we know that's not true at all. And so it's become quite weird, which I think you'll understand more as we talk about it. But the way I say it is, well, first to set this up, all pain is driven by the brain. We used to think that something would happen to the body, and then there were these pain receptors and pain pathways that would make their way to the brain. The brain would ding, 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 there's pain, right? The brain would register. Now we know the brain's receiving information all the time. And the brain is actually deciding what's important and what's not. It decides whether something is dangerous and whether it needs to turn on pain. And so pain is experienced in the brain, driven by the brain, and there can be an output based on the brain's interpretation. But the brain is responsible for all pain 100% of the time, regardless of what's causing it. And so to go a step further, pain is your brain's opinion about whether you're in danger or whether you're safe. And the brain is weighing lots of information to make that decision to turn pain on or off. Hopefully I explained that clearly enough.
Yeah, so my career ended because of a back injury. We talked about this before. I had a herniated disc, like L5S1. Herniation happens on the field. I can't walk off the field. It was my last professional experience. I was released a couple months after that. I'm 4, 5, oh my God, I'm old. I'm 6 years out of that, 6 years out of back surgery. And I still can feel it sometimes. Sometimes there's sciatic pain. Sometimes I don't want to go golfing, or I'm afraid to do things that would aggravate it, or where I would experience some of those feelings again. So if I'm an athlete, I'm past injury. If I was still competing, I feel like I would still have these feelings and still have to deal with it. What do you tell athletes about coming back from injury or experiencing these feelings down the line where they still don't know if they can trust themselves or trust that fully yet?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you and I have sort of a similar story about this sort of disc herniation, and you were at a much higher level athletically than I was at the time. But it's a really great question. I'm tempted. I know we just met, but I'm tempted to kind of blow this up because we don't have a lot of time.
Yeah.
And so I'm feeling like in the mood to just be a little bit extreme today, and just kind of let my freak flag
blow it up. Okay.
So I just had this conversation this morning with a group of coaches talking about lumbar discs. We have so much evidence, that what we see on MRI scan, what we see in radiological imaging, doesn't correlate with pain at all. And there's a lot of research there. So you could have a herniated disc, you could have a disc bulge, a disc tear, you could have some stenosis, you could have a problem with your facet or a bone spur. Those things don't correlate with pain. So that's the setup for this whole topic. The other really cool thing that we've learned in the last decade about the lumbar spine and discs is that they heal themselves. And I didn't know this when I had mine in my 20s, but to say it more directly, healing is reliable. We heal. We're healing organisms. We're not a bike or a car or a computer, right? We're self-healing. And I don't think as athletes we trust that enough. And the lumbar discs were the discs in the spine were always sort of like held separate from that. Like the discs don't heal. Once you have it, you're done. That's not true at all. We see evidence that within 6 months, discs can heal themselves. The immune system goes in and eats away at that material, walls it off. Maybe it's scar tissue. It's not maybe the same tissue it was, but it heals it up, walls it off. And then you're back to where you were. Or you have surgery and they go and they pluck out the disc and you get the same kind of outcome. And this is why the 5-year outcome studies on surgery versus not surgery for the spine are really no different. You might feel better a little sooner if you have surgery, right? So if you can trust that healing is reliable and is predictable, right? And that you can count on it, any pain that you have, let's say 6 months or a year later, is probably no longer due to that disc, right? It's the same pain. All pain is real. There's no difference between the original pain because the disc was pressing on the nerve, and the pain you have 5 years later, that's because you're dealing with stress in your relationship. It's the same pain, because all pain, remember, comes from the brain 100% of the time. And it's not to say the pain's all in your head. That's not what I want listeners to take away from this conversation. But if you really know the science, by definition, the brain is in charge of all of our pain. So 5 years later, you have pain in your back. Most of the time, we can be confident that that's not coming from the disc anymore. We call that a neural pathway. A neural pathway is a past pain experience that your brain has learned, because hopefully, like mine, your brain is really good at learning things. And once it learns some neural pathway, it remembers it. There's a book, The Body Keeps the Score, by Bessel van der Kolk, that your viewers might have read. It was written a long time ago, but it's brilliant, because we know that if you've had an injury in the past, your brain remembers that, and it goes dormant, and then it can light back up, sometimes out of nowhere. I would say there's usually a reason, but it's not usually a physical reason, right? So there's a little bit of stress in your life, or you're going through some change, or you have a boss that you don't love, or you're in the taper for a race and you're not training as much, and you're kind of getting anxious, and you're putting pressure on yourself, and your family's showing up to watch, right? So that fear and anxiety can be enough to trigger the brain back into a state of danger alarm. And the way your brain speaks to you, especially when you're an athlete, is using pain, because it's the best way to get an athlete's attention.
How do you, as a practitioner or even an experienced athlete, when speaking to professional athletes or college athletes or high level and high achieving performers, talk about the mental side of even pre-injury or post-injury? How do you compare the two? How do you put the two together? How do you say, well, it's mental? Number one, most of the time they believe you, right? They'll say, well, my ankle hurts. Well, it's all of these factors that we've already touched on. How do you create the connection between like the mental side of performance and the management of pain and the understanding of it for highly competitive athletes?
Yeah, it's kind of a broad question. I want to start like going back to just maybe say this in a different way. All pain, regardless of what's causing it, we view it now. If you're practicing evidence-based medicine, which a lot of clinicians aren't, but we're working on it, you're always looking at pain through what we call a biopsychosocial lens. So that means we're looking at the body, we're looking at the psychology of the athlete, and we're looking at the social realities of an athlete. And we need to consider sometimes the spiritual components, but we need to consider all of those things to help us understand why this athlete has pain and why this athlete doesn't, or why this athlete recovered from surgery in 3 months and this athlete is 6 months down the road still struggling to overcome it, right? But it doesn't matter whether it's an ankle sprain that just happened or it's ankle pain that's been there for 5 years. Both of those pain experiences are going to be influenced by the body, the psychology, and the social realities of the person. So, in my world, the world I live in, this sort of new paradigm of pain neuroscience that we now understand better, it doesn't really allow us to go back and just consider the body anymore. Does that make sense?
No, could you explain that? Can you explain that a little bit deeper?
So where I started was we used to assume that pain always equaled a body injury.
Yeah.
Always equaled a body problem. So if we really want to treat an athlete effectively, especially for the long term, and get the best outcome, we have to consider the body, tension, stability, strength, mobility, flexibility, movement quality, biomechanics, right? We want to look at those things, but we also have to consider the psychology and the social realities. So what's their mindset? What's their belief, right? Where's their fear? What stories are they telling themselves? What have they heard from other clinicians, coaches, about what's true about their body and what's not? And what's their social reality? What's their relationship like? Do they have kids? Are they working at the same time that they're trying to play their sport? Is their family supportive? This is why the experience of pain is so subjective. It's not because this athlete's tough and this athlete's not. It's because they're living in totally different realities from one another in a lot of ways. They have different upbringings. They have different histories in sport. One athlete might have been bullied by his dad, and he got really good because his dad was really hard on him his whole life. And another athlete may have just been sort of gifted and had a lot of supportive people in his or her life. And they're on the same team, right? But their psychology and their belief and their mindset looks really different. And so their performance is going to be different. And they're probably going to have a really different history when it comes to pain, injury, and surgery, right? So I guess your original question was like pre and post injury. It doesn't really change for me necessarily, except for that once people have been injured, or I'll just say have had pain, because again, pain doesn't always mean that you're injured. Once people have been injured or had pain or had surgery, they have this added fear of the consequences of that. And what does this mean? And what does the future look like, right? There's this added sort of loading of fear and danger into the brain's tendency to make a decision to turn on pain or not.
What's the most common misconception about all of this, about how we understand what our body does and can do, the way our body heals? I come at it from the perspective of being a former professional baseball player, going, man, I don't hope I am stretching enough today, when in fact I feel like I don't need to. I'm trying to really understand, what do most people think? What do you see from most people in regards to this?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's so many different like myths that I spend a lot of time busting with athletes.
Bust them. Let's bust them.
There's so many, right? Like we used to think that getting really strong was a good way to prevent pain, and it's not. It's very little correlation with pain. It helps with performance, but I've seen some of the strongest athletes in the world, and they have pain. They have back pain. It's not because their core is weak, you know? That's a really common one. And it's hard because we all learned, like, if you get strong, you won't have pain.
Right.
You know? Wouldn't that be nice if that was true? It's so convenient. I think the idea that the limitation is always physical or physiologic, right? This default idea that, you know, I'm at my limit of my physiology or my capacity to throw a baseball really fast, because this is all my body can do. When really we're not often reaching our physical capacity because our psychology and our social factors hold us back from being able to do that.
You're telling me I could have thrown harder? You're with the right mindset, I could have thrown the baseball harder? That's,
I mean, so this is the
sore
risk of
thinking about it.
Yeah, this is the risk of having this conversation, right? And introducing this like too fast almost. Like you blind people with the science, because it's like it's blowing up their whole worldview and their whole paradigm of what's true and what's not. And that's kind of scary, intimidating, even though it's the truth.
Right.
It's not always easy to hear. There's the common reaction is, you know, for athletes, there's always this default back to the body. And most athletes, when I survey them, I said, hey, would you rather that your knee pain is due to your, flexibility and strength, or would you rather have it be due to something going on in your relationship that you have to work on? And they'd say, oh, I'd much rather have it be my flexibility and my strength. So there's a real strong orientation toward the body for good reason. But this is the myth that I'm trying to bust for people, that they're feeling physically limited, but it's not because they've hit the peak of their physical abilities. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I'm almost 30 now, and I have these sorenesses, my legs, and I'm afraid to go play soccer, right? Because I'm afraid to take the wrong step and something might pop, even though I still go to the gym, right? Even though I still work out, I still stay in shape. It's almost like I don't I am not trusting of my body anymore.
Mm.
When you hear something like that from either someone you're working with or in conversation, people always want to talk about, how they're feeling and things that they can learn. What do you tell people when they're like, well, I'm afraid to move because I don't want to get injured?
Yeah, it's common. I mean, I have a client recently I'm thinking of that described to me that he felt like a glass cannon. Like he's a really strong, like athletic guy like you, and yet he feels fragile, he feels vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
And so he was avoiding things, and he would remove things from his life that he was really missing because he was scared that he was going to hurt something. And so the sort of the way you flip that, to interrupt that, is to share with people that the reason you feel this way is because you're not moving. The reason you feel this way is because you're not in your body doing the things that show your brain and nervous system that the world is safe, that movement is safe, right? And you want to grade that exposure. Like if you haven't been doing something for a while, you want to sort of gradually reintroduce it. But I like to almost scare people in the opposite direction by saying, if you stop doing those things, you're going to get worse. You have to move. It's not optional, right? And so he's a good example. I called him an athlete, and he got really emotional. But I want him to have this mindset that you're an athlete. Like, look at you, man. Like, you're strong, you're muscular, you're in your like early 40s. Like, you gotta give yourself permission to go back and start playing again. And people need guidance, right, to do that. I'm thinking of Lorimer Moseley, one of my colleagues, Australian researcher, who was involved with writing the book Explain Pain, which is a fantastic basic pain neuroscience education book that you can download. I recommend athletes read it because it really sort of helps people understand this isn't my opinion, right? This is 30 years of science that's behind this. Sometimes it feels like it's hard to believe because people are like, why haven't I heard of this? Like, why didn't my doctor tell me this? Why didn't my PT tell me this? But I love Lorimer Moseley's story because he talks about growing up with his son playing soccer a lot. And then his son got to be a teenager and they weren't playing as much and life got busy. And then his son got to be like 17 or something and said, hey, Dad, you want to go kick the soccer ball? And so they went and kicked the soccer ball. And the first thing he notices, pain scientist Lorimer Moseley, is his knees hurt because he hasn't played soccer in like 5 years. And his reaction, knowing what he knows, is, well, I better start playing soccer more. It's not, well, I shouldn't play soccer. I need to be careful. It's like, I better start kicking the soccer ball more if this is something I want to do. To desensitize his brain and nervous system, which are up here going, what are you doing? You haven't done this in 5 years. This does not feel safe at all. And so it's pinging him. It's like an early danger alarm. The pain is, right, in his knees, an early danger alarm to say, man, are you sure this is safe? And so as athletes, we have to be able to talk back to that sort of fear or scared part of ourselves and say, yeah, this is the way. Do you watch The Mandalorian?
Yes, I did.
Star Wars
guy? Yes.
So I'm sort of free associating right now, but it's how my brain works. The Mandalorian's mantra is, this is the way, like this is the right thing to do. And of course, he knows enough to be confident that he needs to play more soccer if he wants his knees to tolerate it better. And so these are the kind of stories that I tell athletes to sort of interrupt this old mindset, this old narrative that movement is somehow dangerous, and give them permission to start going back and exploring those things again. So the brain doesn't see them as threatening, right? The most important predictor of outcome with any intervention is belief. Also, everyone's different. So Tom Brady benefits from one thing, I benefit from another thing, you benefit from another thing. But the science is really clear that belief is a really important ingredient for why something works for someone and not for someone else. Right. And this is why the research is so hard to pin down, like, is stretching helpful? There's no like clear-cut answer to that question because it's so subjective, it's so context dependent. So Tom Brady, somewhere along the way, learned that mobility and stretching represented safety for him and his body. It felt right? And he really believed that that was the way, to use the Mandalorian term again.
Right.
Or some other athlete might believe that getting super strong and feeling really robust is the best injury prevention strategy. And so I often go back to that, right? Just because I think Pilates is a really great way to be in your body doesn't mean it's going to work for everybody. Just because the research says Pilates is really protective for back pain doesn't mean it's going to help with everyone's back pain, right? They have to believe it. You mentioned injury prevention versus pain, right? A minute ago.
Yeah.
There's some overlap there, but when we talk about injury prevention, like especially in sports, there is a benefit to having a certain amount of flexibility and strength and coordination and balance and precision of movement, right? So that you don't step wrong, or I just watched my kid's ultimate frisbee game. Like this kid jumped over the frisbee so his teammate could catch it under his foot. It was so cool to watch, right? So our ability as athletes to react to these things in the moment demands a certain amount of practice on the field, off the field, right? And so the injury prevention is really about training for your sport in a way that gives you the best physical fitness, for lack of a better term. Prevention of pain is different in my mind. Prevention of pain might be prevention of injury, because if you get injured, you might have pain. Not everybody has pain when they get injured, right? I see my kids, their teammates come off the field looking like they just hurt themselves and they're going to have to go have surgery. They're limping off. And then 5 minutes later, they're back on the field like nothing ever happened, right? We see this all the time in kids' sports. But prevention of pain comes back more to how much do you trust in your training, right? How confident do you feel? How much do you believe that you're doing the right things? Factors that are tied to recovery, like sleep and eating, right? And rest and dosing training and periodization and all these things. But also to psychological well-being and to setting your life up so it works for you socially. Mm-hmm. And that's different. Those things are different for everybody. But the message I want to get across to athletes is we're putting a lot of time and effort into the physical side of things, recovery, right? Body work, training, great. Like it's super important, but we're totally neglecting the other parts that are really missing variables when it comes to why pain comes on. Mm-hmm. So we're treating one bucket well, we're missing two buckets.
What are those two buckets? What are those two buckets?
The psychology and the social realities, right?
Yeah.
If you're working with a sports psychologist, you might be getting some of that, but even that's more focused on mindset around sports performance. It's not focused on helping an athlete with the big feelings about the fact that they lost someone important in their lives, passed away. That's going to affect performance. That's going to affect strength, flexibility, precision of movement, balance, accuracy. But no one's talking about that. It's not helping someone that's being traded and changing teams with their emotions around the loss, right? Of losing their teammates or going to a less ideal situation, or even the anxiety if it's a better situation of like, what's this going to be like? Right? Those things have the ability to either improve performance or reduce performance depending on the athlete. So I don't want to take away the importance of the body stuff, the bio and the biopsychosocial model. I just want to open up the opportunity that performance gets better if we support athletes with their emotions and their thoughts and their behaviors.
If there are parents or coaches listening, what do you hope that they know and ways that they can support their athletes and their communities?
Yeah, it's a great question. If we're talking about, youth sports, there are, of course, a lot of organizations talking about what does it mean to be a healthy parent of an athlete, right? We could get into that, but a lot of parents have heard this, like, I don't yell at my kid from the sidelines and coach from the sidelines. I don't spend a lot of time judging my kid afterwards, telling them about all the things they messed up and how they can improve. I say things like, that was really fun to watch you. Do you want to talk about some of the things that went on during the game? I'm really curious how you experienced that. So all of those things tie to me to like really staying connected with your youth athlete, really being in connection with them, not only in sport, but like in life in general, like what's going on with school, what's going on with relationships. If a kid's struggling with anxiety and depression, like really making sure they have support for those things, right? If they're struggling in school, they might need support in that way, because that's going to affect their performance as well, right? And there's a lot to talk about there. I mean, even getting down to the level of like, how much pressure do we put on our kids to be really good at something and specialize really early? Like, is that really healthy for a kid to niche down when they're young? It wasn't that way when I was young, but I see that more and more and more. These kids are getting pushed into like, this is your sport, this is what you do year round. And I'm not sure that's great until kids are like in high school, even sometimes far into high school. Mm-hmm. There's so much value for us as athletes in synthesizing and learning other sports that you could argue even makes our primary sport better. It enhances our athletic ability in our primary sport, and the break from the thing, having an off season, is something a lot of kids don't have anymore. And that's important physically, but it's almost even more important psychologically to stoke that fire again. So the kid shows up and is like, I'm ready to get after this, prevent burnout. Mm-hmm. And the reality is, like, kids are either really talented. I'm not going to take away that it takes hard work to be good at a sport, but kids either have a lot of talent or they don't. So if you're taking a kid that's not meant to be a collegiate baseball player, basketball player, and you're trying to push them to do that, it's not so healthy. There's some kids that could work their whole lives and never get there.
Right.
I'll put myself in that. Like, I was a really good cyclist. I was a really good master cyclist. And through my 20s and 30s, I felt like I was at a pretty high amateur level. But you could have like trained me like Lance Armstrong and doped me up and give me EPO. I never would have been Lance Armstrong. Not a chance. That wasn't my path in life. I don't have the psychology for it. I don't have the interest in it.
Right. That's really interesting. Would he have been, he said, well, everybody else was doing it and I was still the best. How exceptional of an athlete do you have to be in cycling to do what he did?
Yeah, really exceptional. I think in any sport, that's the case. I think to go to that level in any sport, you have to be exceptional, and you have to work hard.
Right.
Right.
What do you do? You have all this knowledge and you're seeing athletes on a daily basis, and what does Charlie do to stay healthy and stay fit and still be able to enjoy movement? And you mentioned you're almost 50 to still be able to do those things at your age.
Yeah, my advanced.
Sorry about that. Sorry, I didn't mean to back.
No, I'm glad you said it that way. I talk to a lot of people about age because it's also a default reaction to blame age. Whether you're hitting 30 or 40 or 50 or 60, age is like the first thing athletes think of to pin pain on, or to pin like some change in performance on. I have my own unique mix that's been really helpful for me. And this gets back to belief again. I trained very hard to do certain things at different parts of my life. And at one point I was really into trail running. And at one point I was really into racing cyclocross on my bike. And at one point I was really into triathlon. And then I got into CrossFit. So I've been in these phases where I've really enjoyed like the skill acquisition part of learning something new. And then I get to a point where I'm like, I'm kind of ready for something different. So I've learned about myself that I really like novelty. I really like learning new things. And I'm starting to see how that's made me really robust as an athlete, because I use the term movement vocabulary. I feel like I've experienced a large movement vocabulary in my life. You know, I ski a lot, and so the older I get, the more I feel like my body really likes that, and my mind really likes that. Like on a given day, I might go throw the frisbee with my son, and then the next day I'm doing intervals on the track running, and then the next day I'm in the gym doing some stuff there, and I almost don't have a plan of what I'm going to do on a given day. I don't really train for things the way that I used to. And that's really helped me stay. It's worked for me, right? It's like Tom Brady, that thing he did worked for him. This thing resonates. I believe it. So it really works well for me. Now, could I decide, which I have some redemption around trying to run a sub 5-minute mile, that I wanted to like go back and hit that goal? Yeah, I might go do that at some point. I ran 5:01 when I tried that when I was like in my early 40s, and I was so close. But I sort of have to listen psychologically again to say, do I really want that? Like, do I really care enough about it to do it? Because I don't want to do it for the wrong reasons. I think a lot of athletes, we do things sometimes for the wrong reasons, or because we should, or because we're supposed to, or because we need to, or someone told us we should, right? And I kind of wait to be inspired by things, I guess, is the way I think about it. And that's worked really well for my body. If there's a day where I want to do yoga, I do yoga. I'm not like a yogi,
Right.
but it feels good.
I appreciate your time, sir. This has been really insightful, and I love doing this because I get to learn, and I hope that people get to kind of learn through my questions. But I love being curious, and I love talking to people about this. Yeah. Thank you. Great answers.
So much to talk about. There's so many things to talk about. This is just the tip of the iceberg.
We'll have you back. I think it would be great. Where can people find you?
My clinical website is mperformance.com. I have a new website that I'm just building for my course for athletes. It's Merrill Method. My last name is spelled Merrill, merrillmethod.com. And that's where you'll find the landing page for this course that's soon to be released. The idea is that I want to support athletes who have been struggling to try to problem solve why they're still dealing with pain, and starting to learn some of these there's a whole new road to go down, right? Like they've been beating their head against the wall, trying to figure this out, fix it. And there's this great opportunity to try some new things. So I want to support people in that way. It's a mix of learning asynchronously, and then a live coaching component where I work with a group of athletes together to try to do the work of basically unlearning their symptoms. That's how we talk about it. It really is an unlearning when you dig into it. You want the brain just learned this thing, stop doing it.